I just closed the book on a record year. I'd earned more money in 12 months than I'd ever done before in my life. And then the next day, I woke up in hospital, attached to 20 machines and drips coming from every limb. That's how quickly things can change. Today, a little bit different from me. Got a little bit of a story for you. And I think it will help or potentially offer some advice to many of you out there who, probably like me, didn't think anything could go wrong. So, to set the scene, it was literally the end of my financial year for my company. I'd smashed through my targets. I'd done big six figures in revenue. I'd made more profit than ever before. I'd personally earned more money than I'd ever done in a full-time job or self-employed. And I was loving life. My daughter was 11 months old. We just recently kind of come back from traveling around Europe over the summer for 3 months. Life was amazing. And then I just got a little bit ill. I started to feel a bit bad. Spent a day or two in bed. That moved to a week, then 2 weeks. And then, before you know it, I was in hospital. And I was very, very ill. Very ill. Never felt so ill in all my life. And yeah, it was sort of out of the blue, kind of a shock. Didn't really expect it, although I suppose you don't really do expect to get ill. And looking back now, knowing everything I know, there'd probably been a few warning signs. Nothing major, but like I said, my daughter was less than a year old. Anyone who's had kids know how tiring that first year is. So, not much sleep, constantly exhausted. There were, I didn't think there was too much wrong. But obviously, I was very mistaken. Now, running your own business, especially sort of like a small business, especially for a lot of people, a business where it's literally just you, when you're ill, it's obviously not great because you essentially stop working. So what I used to do, if I had a cold or let's say a chest infection, something like that, have a day or two where I don't do any work, and then you get back on with it and you catch up, and no real harm done. But obviously, when you get as ill as I did, everything has to stop. Absolutely everything did stop. I could barely stay awake, I could barely speak, I could barely lift my head, let alone actually do anything. So what that meant was work wasn't even on my mind. And what was on my mind was survival. And it sounds dramatic, but genuinely, that was a reality. I didn't know if I was going to be okay. It sounds, like I said, it does sound very dramatic, but I'd never been that ill in my life. And at the time, wondered if I was going to survive. My wife didn't know if I was going to survive. She was debating whether to bring my daughter in to say goodbye. It got to that stage. I'd been in hospital over 2 weeks, still didn't have a diagnosis. I'd lost 20 kilograms in about 2 weeks as well. So I was not in a good way. But anyway, the diagnosis came, life-changing diagnosis. But then I started to very, very slowly improve. And kind of a month later, I was able to be discharged from hospital just in time for Christmas. So it was awful, a worst moment of my life, probably my wife's life. And yeah, it was very, very, very difficult to deal with. But when you get into that stage of survival, because that's what it was full-on survival mode, work is the last thing on your mind. Now, if you're working in a 9 to 5, it can be the last thing on your mind. Phoning sick, telling me you're in hospital, deal with it down the road. But obviously, that wasn't the case for me. And not only that, like I said, again, my daughter was under a year, so my wife actually wasn't at work. And not only that, we just made the decision that my wife would take another year off work because the business was doing so well that we were earning more than enough that we didn't need her income. So, yeah, so I was then at home, recovering, and kind of unexpected to me, the recovery was not going to be a simple one. We're 18 months down the line now and I'm still struggling, still not fully recovered, far from fully recovered in fact. But when the time came, I had to start thinking about working again because, like I said, I was the sole provider. My wife was looking after our daughter. She wasn't now due back to work for another 12 months. So it all fell on my shoulders, which prior to illness, no problem. The business was brilliant. We were booming. Couldn't see anything going wrong. But of course, life has its ways of throwing up these little surprises for you. So when it came to looking back into work, first step was to assess the damage. And obviously, so the time frame I'm talking about here was around 3 months. So I didn't touch anything for 3 months. In that time, all my softwares I was still paying for my Amazon subscription, still paying my VA. So she did carry on doing some work because she'd been with me a couple of years and I didn't want to lose her. So carried on paying her. And you know, sales were still coming in, obviously. Stock was still selling, but I wasn't buying anything. And the first rule in Amazon FBA is you need to buy stock to sell stock. So it very, very quickly became a problem. To add to this, I was hospitalised right at the end of November. So biggest time of the month, biggest part of the year, and I was out of action. And then you hit Q1, which is notoriously difficult. So it all just sort of compounded. Then, on top of things, there were a plethora of reimbursements that I hadn't dealt with and could no longer deal with. There was lost stock, there were lost shipments. I approximate, well, I know, because I had to do the depressing calculation, that from lost products and damage and reimbursements, etc., it was about 9 grand in pure loss, which is obviously no small amount. And then obviously we have just lack of sales, etc., etc. So Long story short, I was hemorrhaging money. Additionally, as I mentioned before, literally the night of my last day of my accounts, financial year for my business company, that night I literally ended up in hospital. So not only was I losing other money, etc., but the amazing profits that I'd had in the year before, I was going to have to pay tax on, and the downturn in results would have nicely offset my tax bill. But alas, it wasn't to be. So once I kind of come to terms with the car crash that was now the business, it was about rebuilding. So, you know, I wasn't completely on the floor. I had still like a decent amount of money, but obviously I was now going to have to rebuild. Budget to do that was obviously a lot less because of everything that happened. But of course, you know, I still had some stock in Amazon. So I wasn't starting from the beginning, but it was a case for a big rebuild. Now became sort of like the decision time, because I was very vulnerable, very fragile, and I couldn't just carry on with what I was doing, because the biggest realization was, without me, the business stops. Now, I have a VA, sourcing VA, who's brilliant. I'm pretty much 95% of everything I buy is found by her. And I've got a prep centre, so they do all the prep. I don't do anything myself. So I have outsourced, but the reality is, I still buy everything. I add it to the prep sheet. I deal with all the admin. Yes, I use a repricer, but I do the rules, etc. So realistically, take me out of that, the business grinds to a halt. So it became very clear that I had to change that. Obviously, that's not something really a proper business should be. I was kind of treating it as, I would say, a side hustle. It wasn't a side hustle because it was my only income, but it wasn't a business, because once I'm gone, it stops. So it was just me sort of earning money for myself. So on the one hand, what I wanted to do was strip it all back and build slow with good systems, so that my VA could, you know, carry on should things go wrong. But on the other hand, I needed to make money, because our savings were dropping, income had completely disappeared, and like I said, I was the sole income. So it was a real kind of really difficult moment. So what I decided to do was we attacked rebuilding it with sourcing and products. We took a slightly different strategy to the one we had previously, and we started to rebuild, and I then started to put some systems in place. So I put together kind of some SOPs for my VA. I started to train her in everything in the business. I then later took on another VA later down the line. So now there are multiple people that can do multiple things. And I think that is the key. Now, what I never sort of considered with all this was how it would actually affect me, and also how long it would take to rebuild. So when you're starting out on Amazon, as I'm sure everyone watching this will know, you it takes time to build up. You start buying your first few products, you ship it in, and the momentum early on can be quite slow. And then you start building momentum, and then once you do that, the results start to explode. So I was kind of starting again. It was not, like I said, it wasn't from scratch, but compared to where I was, it felt like it. And also my outgoings were quite high because I was at a level where I could have high outgoings because that's how much money we were making. But now I had the same outgoings because I was trying to get back to that place, but we didn't have that momentum. So what then became really difficult was we started to go through a few loss months as we're building up, and then we'd be breaking even, and then we got ourselves back into profit. But during those first few months, it felt really, it took a toll mentally, because my wife and daughter were relying on me. It was all on my shoulders. And honestly, I felt, I felt like a failure because I'd assured my wife that the business would earn us enough money. She didn't have to go back to work. And then it was not making us any money. It was losing money. So mentally, it was horrendous. And then next to this is my recovery. It was very difficult. Like I said, I'm still struggling 18 months later. And the big thing is how to strike a balance, because especially when things aren't going particularly well, when things are going well, I've got all the time in the world to look after myself. If results in the business aren't going particularly well, then the first thing that goes is my health and my recovery, because I haven't got time for it. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I've taken from all this is without health, you've got nothing. And it sounds stupid. I'm nearly 40. It shouldn't have taken me that long to realise this. But I think until something does go wrong, you don't really think about it. And also, you don't think things will just snap and go from fine to not fine. You feel like there'll be time to do something. But it's not always the case. So the turning point really was, I don't know what actually triggered me, but I could see my wife holding us all together, see our money disappearing, and I just realised I had to look after myself and I had to look after my family. And so that's when it all kind of snapped into place. I got some help. I spoke to someone who did help. I then saw physical therapists, nutritionists, you name it, because even though I didn't feel like I could really afford it, I realised it was going to get me to a better place quicker. So where are we now? So I've managed to rebuild the business. We're back flying, loving life. We've got a team as well in the business of VAs who can do everything. If I stopped, it would carry on, it would be no problem. I'm obviously, anyone who is, talks about working 4 hours a week or whatever, that's not me. I'm still heavily involved in the business, and I always would be, but I do now have that option of, if I need a week, 2 weeks off, it will go along fine, and I can come back and, check in, make sure nothing's gone awry. So that's a big thing. But I think more importantly, I've got plans going forward as well. So there's not only are my employees heavily involved in the business, and they're not just on the other side of the world doing their job, their core part of the business, but we've got plans moving forward of how to expand even further. We've got other ventures that we've started also, because that was another realization that multiple income streams are super important, and types of income streams that don't solely rely on my presence. So we have a number of things in the work, which is going really well. So I guess, what was the point in this video? If you've made it this far, then I think it's probably because this sort of story message has resonated with you. And the time of recording, this is in June, at the beginning of June, and it's Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And whilst my illness and my health issues were nothing to do with my mental health, they certainly have affected them in a major way negatively. And prior to this, I was, I didn't belittle mental health, but I probably didn't take it seriously. And what this last 18 months has really taught me is that your mental health is as important as your physical health. And when you are an entrepreneur, when you are running your own business, you can get very isolated. You're working on your own. You are, you've got no one to talk to. And one of the things that I do miss is going into an office, not for the work, but for the people. And so I think it is important that you do talk, you do find people that you can talk to. Obviously, presumably you've got mates, etc. But also finding people to talk to about Amazon or work or entrepreneurship as well is important, because maybe those close around you don't really understand it. So I think a message to you guys would be to take care of yourselves, reach out to people, have a chat about things, look after your mental and physical health, and prioritise the right things. So if any of you guys out there feel like you need to chat, need to talk, don't really know where to turn, there's loads of charities out there. Quick Google search, you'll be able to find some people and you can talk to them for free. But if you want to just have a chat about Amazon, shoot the breeze, connect, then all my socials are in my bio. So just, drop me a message, tell me you've seen this video and you just wanted to chat. And let's talk about Amazon, or anything else for that matter. So look, if you're usually here for my tips and tricks on Amazon, it's a little bit different today, I apologise. But it's It's been quite cathartic for me, and hopefully you guys maybe relate, and maybe a light bulb will go off with someone and this will have been of use. So leave me a comment below just to say you're all okay. Cheers guys, take care.